For centuries, historians, scholars, and theologians have debated the true identity of Zulqarnain, the mysterious figure mentioned in the Quran. Among the many theories, one name stands out prominently: Cyrus the Great, the founder of the Achaemenid Empire. But why do some believe he was the Zulqarnain described in the Quran? What evidence makes him a strong contender for this title? The journey to uncover the truth takes us through ancient history, linguistic analysis, and religious interpretations, but as always, we must remember, true knowledge lies with Allah alone. One of the biggest reasons why Cyrus is considered a candidate for Zulqarnain is his portrayal in history as a just and powerful ruler. The Quran describes Zulqarnain as a king who traveled far and wide, ruling with justice and fairness, helping the weak, and building a great barrier to protect people from an impending threat. Cyrus's legacy matches many of these characteristics. He was not just a conqueror but also a ruler known for his tolerance and policies of religious freedom. The most famous example of this is the Cyrus cylinder, a clay tablet that details how he freed the Jews from Babylonian captivity and allowed them to return to their homeland. Some scholars argue that this act mirrors the justice and wisdom of Zulqarnain. Another factor that strengthens this theory is Cyrus's reputation as a king with vast territorial control. His empire stretched from the lands of Persia to the borders of Greece and deep into Central Asia, a domain that aligns with the Quranic description of Zulqarnain's extensive travels. Some interpretations suggest that the three journeys of Zulqarnain in Surah Kahf, towards the setting sun, towards the rising sun, and towards a people who sought his protection, could correspond to Cyrus's military campaigns in Lydia, the eastern regions of his empire, and the Caucasus Mountains. However, one of the most intriguing aspects of this theory lies in the title, Zulqarnain, itself, which translates to the two-horned one. Many ancient depictions of Cyrus show him wearing a two-horned crown, a distinctive feature that some historians link directly to the Quranic figure. Additionally, in the book of Daniel in the Bible, Cyrus is metaphorically represented as a ram with two horns, symbolizing his dominance over the Medes and Persians. This imagery has led some researchers to conclude that Cyrus is the best historical match for Zulqarnain. Despite these points, the identification of Zulqarnain remains a matter of debate. While Cyrus fits many descriptions, questions remain about whether he truly fulfills all the conditions set in the Quran. Did he build a great barrier against Yajuj and Majuj? Was he divinely guided in the same manner as described in Islamic texts? These are the questions that lead us deeper into our exploration. As we continue to investigate, we must remind ourselves that history provides us with clues, but certainty belongs only to Allah. In the next section, we will examine the specific evidence that scholars use to support this claim, comparing historical records with Quranic descriptions to determine if Cyrus truly fits the role of Zulqarnain. The theory that Cyrus the Great was Zulqarnain is built on a foundation of historical records, religious texts, and linguistic interpretations. Scholars and researchers who support this claim present several key pieces of evidence, each drawing parallels between the Achaemenid emperor and the mysterious ruler described in the Quran. But how strong is this evidence? And does it truly prove that Cyrus was Zulqarnain? One of the strongest arguments in favor of this theory is the Cyrus cylinder, a clay artifact discovered in Babylon. The inscriptions on the cylinder describe Cyrus as a just and merciful king who freed oppressed people and restored religious sanctuaries, including allowing the Jews to return to Jerusalem. This aligns with the Quranic description of Zulqarnain as a leader who was divinely guided and ruled with wisdom. His treatment of different nations, allowing them to worship freely and protecting the weak, mirrors the way Zulqarnain is portrayed in Surah Kahf. Another key piece of evidence is Cyrus's vast empire, which stretched from Asia Minor, modern-day Turkey, to Central Asia and India. The Quran describes Zulqarnain traveling to the west where the sun sets, the east where it rises, and a third unknown location. Supporters of the Cyrus theory argue that his conquests matched this journey. His campaign in Lydia, western Turkey, represents his travel to the setting sun. His expansion into Bactria and India aligns with his journey to the rising sun, and his march into the Caucasus region connects with the construction of the barrier against Yajuj and Majuj. This geographic interpretation makes Cyrus one of the few historical figures whose travels align with the Quranic narrative. Linguistic evidence also plays a role in this debate. The title Zulqarnain, meaning the two-horned one, has intrigued scholars for centuries. Some believe it refers to Cyrus's royal headgear, which was often depicted with two horns, signifying his rule over the Medes and the Persians. This symbolism is also found in the book of Daniel in the Bible, where a two-horned ram represents Cyrus's dual kingdom. If Zulqarnain was indeed a real historical figure, then Cyrus is one of the few rulers known to have been depicted with such imagery. The Quran also describes Zulqarnain as a righteous king who did not seek personal gain but used his power to establish justice. Historical accounts of Cyrus portray him as a similar leader, one who showed clemency towards defeated nations, respected religious beliefs, and ruled with fairness. Unlike many ancient conquerors who focused on destruction and domination, Cyrus is remembered for his policies of tolerance. His treatment of the Jews after conquering Babylon is often cited as an example of his benevolence, and some argue that this act reflects the character of Zulqarnain. Perhaps the most debated piece of evidence is the construction of a great barrier to protect people from a hostile force. The Quran describes Zulqarnain building a strong barrier out of iron and copper to block the invasion of Yajuj and Majuj. Some scholars believe this barrier could be linked to fortifications built in the Caucasus region during Cyrus's reign. Ancient texts mention a massive wall or gates of iron built in the Darial Pass, a narrow valley between present-day Russia and Georgia. The historian al-Tabari and other early Islamic scholars suggested that this could be the same structure mentioned in the Quran. While no definitive evidence connects Cyrus directly to this construction, the timeline and location fit within his era. However, while these pieces of evidence strengthen the argument for Cyrus, they do not provide absolute certainty. Did he personally build the barrier against Yajuj and Majuj? Was his rule truly guided by divine revelation as described in the Quran? These are questions that remain open to interpretation. As we move forward, we must critically examine the challenges to this theory. The problem of historical timelines, inconsistencies in religious texts, and the deeper meaning of Zulqarnain's title all present counter-arguments that must be explored. In the next section, we will analyze these contradictions and assess whether the Cyrus theory holds up against historical scrutiny. The Cyrus-Zulqarnain theory presents an intriguing possibility, but one of its biggest challenges lies in aligning the historical timeline of Cyrus the Great with the Quranic narrative. While some evidence supports the idea that Cyrus fits the description of Zulqarnain, discrepancies in historical records and chronology raise critical doubts. Could the events described in Surah Kahf truly align with the timeline of Cyrus's reign? Or do these inconsistencies suggest that Zulqarnain was someone else entirely? One of the first issues we encounter is the dating of Zulqarnain's journey. The Quran presents him as a powerful ruler who traveled to distant lands and constructed a massive barrier against Yajuj and Majuj. However, there are no definitive records from Cyrus's era, 6th century BCE, describing such a construction. While some scholars link Zulqarnain's barrier to fortifications in the Caucasus region, there is no historical evidence proving that Cyrus himself commissioned them. If he truly built such an imposing structure, why do Persian, Greek, and Babylonian records remain silent about it? The Quranic timeline of Zulqarnain's travels is another area of debate. The Quran describes three major journeys: one to the west, where the sun sets, one to the east, where it rises, and a third to a mysterious people needing protection. While Cyrus's campaigns took him westward into Lydia, modern Turkey, eastward towards Bactria and India, and northward into Central Asia, there is no explicit mention of his final journey to a people fearing the invasion of Yajuj and Majuj. If this event was as monumental as the Quran suggests, shouldn't some historical records mention it? Another critical issue is the absence of Cyrus in early Islamic interpretations. The earliest Islamic scholars, including Ibn Kathir and al-Tabari, did not identify Zulqarnain as Cyrus. Instead, some linked him to Alexander the Great, while others believed he was a separate, unknown figure. The Cyrus theory only gained traction much later, particularly in the modern era when linguistic and archaeological discoveries shed new light on ancient Persian history. If Cyrus was the true Zulqarnain, why did early Islamic scholars overlook this possibility? The timeline of Yajuj and Majuj also presents a major contradiction. The Quran suggests that Zulqarnain's barrier was built to contain a destructive force that will only be released near the end of time. But historical records from Cyrus's period do not mention any major apocalyptic fears regarding an invasion of barbaric tribes. The closest parallel is the Scythians, a nomadic group that threatened the northern regions of the Persian Empire. However, There is no evidence that Cyrus or his successors viewed them in the same way that the Quran describes Yajuj and Majuj. If this was a significant event during his reign, why does it not appear in historical accounts? Additionally, the dating of the Quranic revelation creates another challenge. Surah Kahf was revealed in response to Jewish scholars questioning Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, about Zulqarnain. The Jews, likely drawing from their own scriptures and traditions, seem to recognize Zulqarnain as a well-known historical figure. However, Jewish texts from that period reference Nebuchadnezzar and Alexander the Great more frequently than Cyrus. If Cyrus was widely recognized as Zulqarnain by Jewish scholars, why did they not name him directly? Another issue is the absence of monotheistic beliefs in the Persian Empire during Cyrus's time. The Quran describes Zulqarnain as a ruler guided by Allah, who ruled with justice and followed divine wisdom. While Cyrus was known for his religious tolerance, his official inscriptions credit his rule to Marduk, the chief deity of Babylon, rather than a singular, monotheistic god. Although the Cyrus cylinder speaks of freeing oppressed people and restoring temples, it does not indicate that Cyrus himself was a believer in one god in the way the Quran describes Zulqarnain. If Zulqarnain was truly divinely guided, shouldn't we expect to see clearer evidence of his faith? Lastly, the linguistic interpretation of the name, Zulqarnain, poses another timeline challenge. Some scholars argue that the title means, the two-horned one, and point to the ram with two horns in the Book of Daniel, which is believed to represent Cyrus's dual rule over the Medes and the Persians. However, the Book of Daniel was written after Cyrus's reign, meaning the connection between his identity and the title of Zulqarnain may have been applied retrospectively rather than during his lifetime. If this title was significant enough to be mentioned in the Quran, why is there no evidence that Cyrus was known by it during his own era? While Cyrus's just rule, vast empire, and tolerance toward different faiths make him a strong candidate for Zulqarnain, these historical timeline issues cannot be ignored. If he truly built the barrier against Yajuj and Majuj, where is the archaeological proof? If he was divinely guided, why do his inscriptions reference pagan gods? And if Jewish scholars recognized Zulqarnain's story, why is Cyrus's name missing from their records? These contradictions suggest that while Cyrus may have characteristics similar to Zulqarnain, the historical timeline does not provide a definitive match. In the next section, we will explore the linguistic debate surrounding the name Zulqarnain and whether it truly applies to Cyrus, or if another figure might fit better. The name Zulqarnain, meaning, the two-horned one, has sparked intense debate among historians, linguists, and Islamic scholars. Who was this mysterious ruler, and why was he given this title? Some scholars argue that it refers to Cyrus the Great, while others believe it is more symbolic, representing power, dual rule, or even divine authority. But does the linguistic evidence truly support the Cyrus theory? One of the biggest challenges is that Zulqarnain is an Arabic title, not a name. Unlike historical figures whose names appear in multiple languages, Zulqarnain is a Quranic term, and there is no direct historical reference where someone was explicitly called Zulqarnain before the Quran was revealed. This raises the question, was this title known in previous civilizations, or was it a divinely assigned designation used to describe a ruler's attributes rather than his actual identity? The meaning of two horns. The word qarn in Arabic can mean horn, generation, or era. The most common interpretation is the one with two horns, suggesting a ruler associated with two powers, two kingdoms, or a divine connection. But different interpretations exist. Literal horns. Some suggest Zulqarnain physically wore a helmet with two horns, which aligns with depictions of Alexander the Great and Cyrus the Great in ancient art. The Cyrus cylinder does not show him with a horned helmet, but some claim that Persian reliefs might have depicted such symbolism. Two kingdoms. Others argue that, two-horned, represents a ruler who controlled two vast lands. Cyrus the Great ruled over both the Medes and the Persians, which some see as fulfilling this meaning. Spiritual meaning. Some Islamic scholars suggest the title signifies power granted by Allah in two eras or two realms, possibly the material and spiritual worlds. The Book of Daniel and the ram with two horns. A key piece of evidence supporting Cyrus as Zulqarnain comes from the Book of Daniel, Old Testament. In Daniel 8:3-4, the prophet Daniel describes a vision of a ram with two horns, representing the Medo-Persian Empire, which many scholars associate with Cyrus. The ram dominates the region until it is defeated by a goat, symbolizing Greece, led by Alexander the Great. Since the Quranic Zulqarnain is described as a just ruler blessed with power, some believe this vision supports the Cyrus-Zulqarnain theory. However, there is an issue. The Book of Daniel was written after Cyrus's reign, meaning this interpretation was applied retrospectively. If two-horned was already a well-known title for Cyrus, why do Persian records not use it? Was Cyrus ever called two-horned? Unlike Alexander the Great, who was explicitly depicted with ram's horns on his coins due to his connection with the god Zeus Ammon, there is no clear evidence that Cyrus was called two-horned during his lifetime. His inscriptions refer to him as king of the four corners of the world, but not as Zulqarnain. One argument in favor of Cyrus is that Persian kings often had symbolic titles that could be loosely translated as two-horned. Some claim the Achaemenid crown might have had horn-like decorations, but there is no concrete proof that Cyrus was recognized for this imagery the way Alexander was. If Zulqarnain's title was well known before the Quran, why do we not see it in any ancient Persian, Babylonian, or Greek inscriptions? If it was a Quranic designation, was it meant to describe an unknown figure whose true identity remains uncertain? The Arabic language and Zulqarnain. Another key debate is whether Zulqarnain was originally an Arabic term or borrowed from earlier languages. Some scholars suggest that Zulqarnain is a linguistic adaptation of an older name, possibly from Aramaic, Persian, or Hebrew traditions. Aramaic connection. Some believe Zulqarnain could be linked to an ancient Aramaic title for a powerful ruler, possibly referring to the dual kingship of Media and Persia. Persian influence. The Persian word, qarn, related to qarn, meant power, or horn, possibly aligning with the Quranic description. Greek and Hebrew influence. The Hebrew word, qarnaim, also means horns, similar to how Alexander the Great was called, son of the horned god. However, there is no definitive proof that Cyrus himself was called Zulqarnain in any of these languages. If the title existed before Islam, why is there no historical evidence of it being used for Cyrus? And if it was uniquely Arabic, was it meant to describe Zulqarnain's character rather than his real name? The Quranic Zulqarnain verses. Historical titles. Some Islamic scholars argue that the title Zulqarnain in the Quran should not be tied to any specific historical figure. They suggest that the Quran uses symbolic language to describe certain rulers, similar to how dual kifl is believed to refer to a righteous person rather than a known king. This raises an important point. Was Zulqarnain an actual historical king, or was the name used to describe a figure whose true identity remains hidden? The linguistic ambiguity of the title leaves room for multiple interpretations. Final thoughts. The linguistic debate over Zulqarnain's name highlights the complexities of identifying this mysterious ruler. While Cyrus the Great's dual kingship and the Book of Daniel's vision of the two-horned ram provide strong arguments, the lack of direct historical evidence weakens the case. If the name Zulqarnain was known before the Quran, why do ancient sources not mention it? If it was a new title given in the Quran, does it mean Zulqarnain was not meant to be linked to any known figure? In the next section, we will examine whether Cyrus truly fits the Quranic descriptions of Zulqarnain, or if the inconsistencies in history suggest that we are looking in the wrong place altogether. The Quranic Zulqarnain is described as a righteous ruler with vast power, a just nature, and a deep connection to divine guidance. But does Cyrus the Great fit this portrayal? Many scholars argue that Cyrus closely matches some aspects of Zulqarnain's character, while others highlight critical inconsistencies. To determine whether Cyrus aligns with the Quranic descriptions, we must examine his conquests, leadership, and spiritual beliefs in light of the verses in Surah Al-Kahf 18, 83-98. 1. Was Cyrus a just and righteous ruler? One of the defining traits of Zulqarnain is his justice and kindness. The Quran portrays him as a ruler who treated people fairly, punished wrongdoers justly, and helped those in need. Cyrus is often praised for his tolerance and benevolence. The Cyrus Cylinder, an ancient inscription dating to the 6th century BCE, describes how he freed the Jews from Babylonian captivity and allowed them to return to Jerusalem. This act of mercy aligns with the Quranic portrayal of Zulqarnain as a compassionate leader. Additionally, historical sources suggest that Cyrus respected the cultures and religions of the lands he conquered, unlike many other ancient rulers who imposed their own beliefs. This supports the idea that he had a just and balanced approach to governance, which fits with Zulqarnain's Quranic depiction. However, some scholars argue that Cyrus was still an empire builder, and like all conquerors, his rule involved warfare and expansion. The Quran, however, does not portray Zulqarnain as an empire-hungry ruler. Instead, it presents him as someone who traveled to different lands on a divine mission, not for conquest. This difference raises the question: was Cyrus's rule truly in line with Zulqarnain's role as described in the Quran? 2. Did Cyrus undertake 3 major journeys? The Quran narrates that Zulqarnain traveled to 3 distinct locations. 1. A journey to the west, where he saw the sun setting in a muddy spring. 2. A journey to the east, where he found a people exposed to the sun. 3. A journey to a region where people sought his help to build a barrier against Yajuj and Majuj, Gog and Magog. Do these journeys match the expeditions of Cyrus? The Western Journey. Some historians suggest that Cyrus's western campaigns brought him to areas near the Aegean Sea, where he fought against the Lydian kingdom. However, there is no direct record of him witnessing the sun setting in a muddy spring, making this connection speculative. The Eastern Journey. Cyrus did lead military expeditions toward Central Asia, possibly reaching areas where people lived in open deserts, exposed to the harsh sun. But again, there is no definitive historical account of an encounter resembling the Quranic description. The barrier against Yajuj and Majuj. This is perhaps the most debated point. Some claim that Cyrus's campaigns brought him to the Caucasus Mountains, where he may have built fortifications, possibly inspiring the Quranic description of the barrier against Yajuj and Majuj. However, there is no clear evidence that Cyrus built any structure matching the Quranic description. While some events in Cyrus's life resemble Zulqarnain's journeys, none align perfectly. His military campaigns were primarily for conquest and territorial expansion, whereas Zulqarnain's travels in the Quran appear more like a divinely guided mission. 3. Did Cyrus believe in one God? Zulqarnain is described as a monotheist, someone who acknowledges the power of Allah and follows divine guidance. Did Cyrus hold similar beliefs? The Cyrus Cylinder states that Cyrus credited his victories to Marduk, the Babylonian god, which raises doubts about his monotheism. However, some scholars argue that this does not mean Cyrus was a polytheist. It could have been a political gesture to gain support from the Babylonians. In Isaiah 45, 1-3, Cyrus is referred to as the anointed one of God in the Jewish tradition, suggesting that he was favored by the Almighty. Some scholars believe this means he could have been a true believer in one God, but there is no definitive proof that Cyrus rejected polytheism entirely. The Quranic Zulqarnain acknowledges his power as a blessing from Allah alone and shows complete submission to divine will. While Cyrus might have believed in a higher power, he does not explicitly fit the Quranic image of a devout monotheist. 4. Did Cyrus build a barrier against Yajuj and Majuj? One of Zulqarnain's most famous acts in the Quran is his construction of a massive barrier to protect a group of people from the destructive forces of Yajuj and Majuj, Gog and Magog. Some scholars suggest that Cyrus's military campaigns in the Caucasus region could be linked to this event. He may have fortified mountain passes to keep out invading tribes. The Derbent Wall in Russia and the Great Wall of Gorgan in Iran are often cited as possible locations. However, there is no historical evidence that Cyrus himself built a massive iron and copper barrier like the one described in the Quran. The structures attributed to him do not match the Quran's detailed description of a sealed wall made of molten metal. 5. Did Cyrus match the Quranic character of Zulqarnain? Zulqarnain is depicted as a righteous, divinely guided ruler who undertook great journeys, acted with absolute justice, and built a legendary barrier. While Cyrus the Great was certainly a powerful and just leader, there are several contradictions that make his identification as Zulqarnain problematic. His campaigns were for empire expansion, whereas Zulqarnain appears to have traveled for divine missions. He may not have been a true monotheist, as he is associated with Marduk and other deities. His historical journeys do not perfectly align with the Quranic narrative. There is no concrete evidence that he built a barrier like Zulqarnain did. Final thoughts. While Cyrus the Great remains a strong candidate for Zulqarnain, the evidence is not conclusive. His justice, military achievements, and reputation fit certain aspects of the Quranic figure, but other crucial details do not align perfectly. If Cyrus were truly Zulqarnain, why do historical records not explicitly call him two-horned? And why do his travels and actions differ from the Quranic description? In the next episode, we will explore these contradictions further and dive deeper into the Quranic story itself. Could it be that Zulqarnain was not meant to be identified with any historical figure, but rather a symbol of divine justice and power? Or is there another ruler we have overlooked? The search for Zulqarnain's identity continues. After analyzing Cyrus the Great's character, historical role, conquests, and religious beliefs, the question remains, does he truly match Zulqarnain as described in the Quran? While many scholars argue that he is the strongest candidate, others point out key contradictions that make his identification uncertain. To reach a final verdict, let's summarize the arguments for and against him and see if he truly fits the role of Zulqarnain. 1. The strongest arguments in favor of Cyrus. Cyrus is widely regarded as a just and merciful ruler, a quality strongly associated with Zulqarnain in the Quran. Some of the strongest arguments in favor of him being Zulqarnain include his reputation for justice and mercy. The Cyrus cylinder portrays him as a liberator, particularly for the Jewish people, whom he freed from Babylonian captivity. This aligns with Zulqarnain's character as a righteous and fair ruler. His vast empire and travels. Cyrus's conquests took him both westward and eastward, similar to the journeys of Zulqarnain. Some historians argue that his military campaigns in Central Asia could align with Zulqarnain's eastern journey. Possible connection to a Great Barrier. Some believe that fortifications built in the Caucasus region, such as the Derbent Wall, could be linked to Zulqarnain's efforts against Yajuj and Majuj, Gog and Magog. The title, two-horned, could refer to him. Cyrus is sometimes associated with the ram with two horns in the book of Daniel in the Bible. If this reference is linked to him, it could explain why Zulqarnain was given the title, the two-horned one, in the Quran. Possible belief in one God. The book of Isaiah in the Old Testament refers to Cyrus as God's anointed one, suggesting he may have recognized a higher divine authority, though this remains debatable. Given these points, Cyrus remains a strong contender for Zulqarnain. But do these factors fully confirm his identity? 2. The contradictions. Why he might not be Zulqarnain. Despite the compelling arguments, several contradictions make Cyrus's identification problematic. His conquests do not match Zulqarnain's journeys. Cyrus's expeditions were primarily for empire expansion, whereas Zulqarnain's travels appear to be missions of guidance and justice. The Quran does not depict Zulqarnain as a conqueror, but rather as a leader fulfilling a divine purpose. His religious beliefs are unclear. The Cyrus cylinder attributes his victories to Marduk, the Babylonian god, which suggests he was not a strict monotheist. Zulqarnain, on the other hand, acknowledges his power as a blessing from Allah alone. If Cyrus was truly Zulqarnain, why does history not record him as a clear believer in one God? No strong evidence that he built the Quranic barrier. While some claim that Cyrus may have constructed fortifications in the Caucasus, none match the Quran's detailed description of an iron and copper wall sealed against Yajuj and Majuj. The Quranic account describes a massive engineering feat, which is absent from Cyrus's historical records. The linguistic debate over the name Zulqarnain. If Cyrus were truly Zulqarnain, why does history not refer to him by this title? The name Zulqarnain, two-horned, seems to be a defining feature, yet there is no solid historical evidence that Cyrus was widely known by this name. 3. So, does he match or not? The answer is not a simple yes or no. While Cyrus the Great shares some similarities with Zulqarnain, the gaps and contradictions in his historical record make it difficult to fully confirm his identity. At best, he remains one of the strongest possibilities, but not a definitive answer. The biggest challenge in identifying Zulqarnain with any historical figure is that the Quran does not provide specific names or dates. Instead, it presents Zulqarnain as a righteous leader whose story holds deep moral and spiritual lessons. Perhaps the real purpose of his mention in the Quran is not to identify him with a historical ruler, but rather to illustrate the qualities of a just and God-fearing leader. 4. Could Zulqarnain be someone else? If Cyrus is not Zulqarnain, could another figure be a better fit? Some alternative candidates include Alexander the Great. Some medieval Islamic scholars believed Alexander was Zulqarnain due to his vast empire, but this theory has major flaws, especially since Alexander followed Greek polytheism, which contradicts Zulqarnain's clear belief in one God. A lost or unknown ruler. Some scholars suggest Zulqarnain could have been a leader whose historical records were lost over time. Given that much of ancient history remains incomplete, it is possible that Zulqarnain's true identity has not yet been discovered. A symbolic or archetypal figure. Another perspective is that Zulqarnain may not represent a single historical individual, but rather an archetype of a righteous leader who ruled with divine wisdom. This would mean the emphasis of his story is not on who he was historically, but rather on the lessons his rule teaches us. 5. The Islamic perspective. Only Allah knows the truth. Ultimately, as Muslims, we must acknowledge that true knowledge belongs to Allah alone. We can analyze historical evidence, compare different theories, and make educated guesses, but the reality of Zulqarnain's identity is known only to Allah. The purpose of his story in the Quran is not historical speculation, but rather a moral and spiritual lesson about justice and righteousness in leadership, obedience to divine guidance, protection of the weak and oppressed, the power and will of Allah over all things. The focus should not be on whether Cyrus, Alexander, or another ruler was Zulqarnain, but rather on the values and wisdom the story teaches us. 6. What's next? The search continues. Now that we have examined Cyrus the Great's possible connection to Zulqarnain, where do we go from here? In the next episode, we will return to the Quranic story itself and analyze its deeper meanings. Instead of focusing solely on historical figures, we will explore the wisdom behind Zulqarnain's actions, the symbolic significance of his 3 journeys, what the Quran's narrative reveals about leadership and faith. Was Zulqarnain a historical king, or is his story meant to convey universal truths about power, justice, and divine will? Join us in the next episode as we continue uncovering the mysteries of Zulqarnain and Yajuj Majuj. After exploring Cyrus the Great's possible connection to Zulqarnain, it's time to shift our focus back to the Quran itself. History gives us many interpretations, but the ultimate source of truth is the word of Allah. Instead of trying to fit historical figures into the Quranic narrative, what if we analyze the story of Zulqarnain purely from an Islamic perspective? The next episode will take us on a deep dive into the Quranic verses, breaking down each of Zulqarnain's 3 journeys. These journeys are not just tales of conquest, they hold profound wisdom about power, justice, and divine purpose. What lessons do they teach us? What deeper meanings lie behind them? And most importantly, how does this story connect to the great trial of Yajuj and Majuj? We will revisit the key themes of the Quranic narrative. Why was Zulqarnain chosen for this mission? What do his journeys represent on a spiritual and historical level? How do his actions reflect true Islamic leadership? Is there a connection between Zulqarnain's travels and different dimensions or unseen realms? As always, we must remind ourselves, only Allah knows the full truth. We can analyze, debate, and search for answers, but at the end of the day, the real knowledge belongs to Allah alone. Join us in episode 5 as we move beyond historical debates and look at Zulqarnain's story through the lens of the Quran itself. Be prepared for a journey that might change the way you understand one of the most mysterious and fascinating figures in Islamic history. Stay tuned. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to keep following this series as we uncover the mysteries of Zulqarnain and Yajuj Majuj.